Light tanks are small, fast armored vehicles built to scout ahead, screen friendly forces, and exploit gaps rather than trade heavy blows. They work by combining a cannon or rapid-fire gun with good speed, low weight, and enough armor to stop small arms and shrapnel. Because they are lighter, they can cross weaker bridges and move through rough ground more easily than larger tanks. A surprising fact is that many early World War II armies still relied heavily on light tanks, but as anti-tank weapons improved, this type shifted from frontline fighting toward reconnaissance and support roles. Medium tanks were designed as the balanced all-rounders of armored warfare. They sit between light and heavy tanks, mixing decent armor, mobility, and firepower, so they can attack, defend, and maneuver with fewer trade-offs. In practice, a medium tank works by carrying a gun strong enough to defeat most enemy armor, while staying mobile enough to keep up with fast-moving operations. One interesting real-world fact is that some of history's most famous tanks, like the Soviet T-34 and American Sherman, were medium tanks, and their balance made them far more useful in large numbers than heavier, more specialized vehicles. Heavy tanks were built to smash through strong defenses and survive hits that would cripple lighter vehicles. They work by using thick armor and large guns, but that protection comes at the cost of speed, fuel use, and mechanical strain. On the battlefield, heavy tanks often led assaults or acted as mobile strongpoints, intimidating enemies with both their size and firepower. A striking fact is that some heavy tanks became legendary more for fear and reputation than practical value, because their huge weight often made them hard to transport, prone to breakdowns, and limited by bridges and muddy ground. Super heavy tanks are the extreme end of tank design, gigantic machines intended to be nearly unstoppable fortresses on tracks. They work in theory by combining enormous armor and very large guns, making them hard to destroy from the front. In reality, their massive weight creates huge problems with transport, fuel, reliability, and even basic movement over roads and bridges. That is why this type remained rare and mostly experimental. A fascinating fact is that the German Panzer VIII Maus, one of the best-known super-heavy designs, was so heavy at around 188 tons that it could not use normal bridges and was planned to cross rivers by driving submerged along the bottom. The main battle tank, or MBT, replaced the old light, medium, and heavy categories by combining strong armor, a powerful main gun, and good mobility in one vehicle. It works as the standard frontline tank in many modern armies, using advanced fire control, stabilized guns, and powerful engines to fight while moving and survive on today's battlefield. MBTs are designed to handle many roles at once, from breaking through defenses to fighting enemy armor. An interesting fact is that modern main battle tanks often weigh as much as old heavy tanks, yet move faster and hit more accurately thanks to better engines, suspension, and electronics. Cruiser tanks were a British tank type built for speed and movement, almost like cavalry on tracks. They worked by using relatively lighter armor and higher speed to race around enemy positions, exploit breakthroughs, and strike deep behind the front. Instead of slowly grinding forward, cruiser tanks were meant to keep moving and create chaos in the enemy's rear areas. A notable fact is that this idea reflected older cavalry thinking, and while many cruiser tanks struggled with armor and reliability early on, the concept helped shape later fast, flexible tank designs that valued mobility as much as protection. Infantry tanks were another British category, designed to move at the pace of foot soldiers and support them directly in battle. They worked by carrying thick armor so they could survive enemy fire while advancing methodically against machine guns, strongpoints, and defended lines. Speed mattered less than protection because these tanks were expected to stay close to infantry rather than race ahead. A surprising fact is that some infantry tanks were so heavily armored for their time that enemy weapons struggled badly against them, but their slow speed could make them vulnerable if battle conditions changed or fast maneuver became necessary. Amphibious tanks are armored vehicles designed to fight on land and also cross water under their own power. They work by using watertight hulls, flotation screens, pontoons, or specially shaped bodies, along with tracks or propellers to move through rivers, lakes, or coastal waters. Their main purpose is to get armored firepower ashore quickly during crossings and landings. An interesting fact is that amphibious tanks played important roles in several major wars, and some were launched from landing craft or swam directly to beaches, giving troops immediate support before heavier vehicles could be brought in. Airborne tanks are very light tanks or tank-like armored vehicles made so they can be transported by aircraft and delivered to paratroopers or air landing forces. They work by sacrificing heavy armor for low weight, compact size, and enough firepower to support troops who arrive far from normal supply lines. Once on the ground, they provide mobile protection and a gun that infantry alone would lack. A surprising fact is that true airborne tanks have always been difficult to build because aircraft weight limits are so strict, which is why many armies turned instead to lighter armored vehicles rather than full tanks. Flame tanks are tanks fitted with flamethrowers, usually replacing or supplementing a normal weapon. They work by carrying fuel in protected tanks and projecting burning liquid through a nozzle using pressure, creating a short-range but terrifying weapon against bunkers, trenches, caves, and fortified buildings. Their psychological effect could be as important as their physical damage, because defenders often feared them intensely. A striking real-world fact is that many flame tanks were based on ordinary tank chassis, allowing armies to convert existing vehicles into specialized assault machines, instead of designing entirely new tanks from scratch. Mine-clearing tanks are armored vehicles adapted to open safe paths through minefields. They work by carrying special equipment such as flails that beat the ground, rollers that trigger mines, plows that push mines aside, or explosive line charges that blast a lane through. The heavy armor protects the crew while the tank advances into one of the most dangerous parts of the battlefield. An interesting fact is that some mine-clearing systems look almost bizarre, especially spinning flails with chains, but they have saved countless lives by letting infantry and vehicles move through areas that would otherwise stop an entire attack. Bridge-laying tanks are engineering vehicles built on tank chassis that carry a folding or launching bridge instead of a turret. They work by driving up to a ditch, canal, or damaged crossing, and quickly placing a bridge so other vehicles can pass. Using a tank base gives them armor and mobility, allowing engineers to work close to the front where ordinary bridge trucks might be too vulnerable. A useful fact is that these vehicles can turn an obstacle into a crossing point in just minutes, which can be crucial in combat because delays at rivers or anti-tank ditches often give defenders time to recover. Recovery tanks, often called armored recovery vehicles, are support machines designed to tow, lift, and repair damaged tanks under dangerous conditions. They work by replacing the main turret with cranes, winches, tools, and heavy towing gear, while keeping the armor and tracked mobility of a combat vehicle. This lets crews rescue broken or stuck tanks from mud, shell holes, or enemy fire without sending in unprotected trucks. A surprising fact is that modern armies depend heavily on these vehicles, because even the best tank is useless if it cannot be recovered, repaired, and returned to service quickly. Command tanks are tanks modified to serve as mobile headquarters for battlefield leaders. They work by carrying extra radios, navigation gear, map tools, and sometimes additional power systems, allowing commanders to direct units while staying protected and moving with the fight. To make room for this equipment, some command tanks reduce ammunition or slightly change their internal layout. An interesting fact is that from the outside, they can look almost identical to ordinary tanks, which helps conceal where senior officers are, because a clearly marked command vehicle would become an obvious and valuable target. Tank destroyers are armored fighting vehicles built mainly to knock out enemy tanks. They work by mounting powerful anti-tank guns on tracked chassis, often trading some armor or turret flexibility for a stronger weapon, lower profile, or cheaper production. In some armies, they were meant to ambush enemy armor, while in others they acted like fast, mobile anti-tank reserves. A fascinating fact is that despite the name, many tank destroyers were not actually tanks at all, and their designs ranged from turretless gun carriers to turreted vehicles that looked very similar to standard tanks. Assault guns are armored vehicles designed to support infantry by blasting bunkers, buildings, and strongpoints with direct fire. They work by mounting a gun in a fixed superstructure instead of a rotating turret, which makes the vehicle simpler, lower, and often cheaper to build. Because the gun has limited side movement, the whole vehicle usually has to turn to aim at targets off to one side. An interesting real-world fact is that some assault guns ended up fighting tanks very effectively, even though that was not their original purpose, simply because their guns became powerful enough to do both jobs. Self-propelled anti-aircraft tanks are tracked armored vehicles armed with rapid-fire guns or missiles to defend forces from aircraft and helicopters. They work by moving with tank units and using radar, optics, or fast manual aiming to detect and engage aerial threats before they can strike. Their tracked chassis lets them keep up over rough ground where wheeled air defense vehicles might struggle. A notable fact is that many of these vehicles later gained a second life against ground targets, because their fast-firing weapons are also very effective against infantry, light vehicles, and even low-flying drones. Chemical flame and demolition tanks are specialized assault vehicles built to destroy very tough defenses using flamethrowers, demolition charges, or heavy, short-range weapons. They work by moving close under armor and delivering intense force against bunkers, walls, tunnels, or urban strongpoints that ordinary guns may struggle to clear quickly. These vehicles are rare because they are highly specialized and often dangerous to use at close range. A striking fact is that some were developed after armies learned that even powerful standard tanks could have trouble against deeply buried or heavily reinforced positions, especially in cities and island battles. An unmanned turret tank is a modern tank design where the crew sits in the hull while the turret above is controlled remotely. It works by using cameras, sensors, and electronic controls to aim and fire the gun without placing people in the most exposed part of the vehicle. This can improve crew protection and allow a smaller turret profile, making the tank harder to hit. An interesting fact is that while the idea sounds futuristic, engineers explored versions of it decades ago, but only recent advances in sensors, computing, and reliable controls have made it much more practical.